You have the people support, and I think the only way that that could be broken is if, say, some outsiders try to disrupt what has been a peaceful protest. Do you agree?
Okay, so that is Sean Hannity lying in a couple different directions simultaneously, and we're going to address all of them in this clip. So the first is talking there to a representative of this protest that you have the people's support, which is not literally untrue. There are people who support them, but colloquially, that sort of expression is used when a majority, or at least a significant chunk of the population supports you. As we will show, that is not the case. At the same time, though, he's multitasking. He managed to fit in that there has been no illegal acts, no, for instance, attempts to burn down buildings, violent confrontations with counter protesters or with people who just live in the area, no reasons to believe that more violence could be coming. And at the same time, he also prepped his audience that if there is violence in the future, it's not gonna be their fault, even if they're the ones who are doing it. You heard it in that clip, and it has been a touchstone of his coverage for about 2 weeks now on this issue. So back on the 14th, he said that if Canadian truckers are arrested, quote, he can't guarantee that at that point people won't defend themselves, laying sort of the philosophical groundwork for if they become violent, you forced them into it. That's definitely how he's approached violent protesters in the past, by the way. Earlier, 3 days before that, he said to Justin Trudeau, people may die if truckers are arrested. And he looks at that as just this like angelic being floating above it. People may die. Who's to say who will be killing who? But people may die. Wouldn't that be a tragedy if you forced that to happen? Now, of course, never acknowledging, Dan, that for instance, Alberta police seized a cache of firearms, body armor, and ammunition that you can see in this tweet. They will never acknowledge this. And again, that doesn't mean that all of the protesters are violent or that the protest fundamentally is invalid. But you kind of have to understand the context when you're predicting murder in the future, that they won't even acknowledge the guns. So, and then to do that, to not acknowledge the likelihood of violence or the fact that they have guns, and then to go one step further, as Jesse Waters do, to compare them to Gandhi of all people, or Tucker Carlson, who said last week that it is the greatest human rights protest or social movement in a generation. So they're going, I think, a little bit too far there, Dan. What do you think?
Yeah, they are using this as a convenient ideological and rhetorical weapon for their audience to say, hey, look, people around the world are resisting vaccine mandates and we should join them. They are clogging up the ports, even though we were just complaining a couple months ago about Joe Biden clogging up the ports. And they are doing this for our reasons, for our righteous reasons, not for other reasons. You literally had Ben Shapiro at one point saying like, listen, I know I've been upset with people blocking traffic during protests before, but this time it's righteous. They don't care about the hypocrisy, which, I mean, after years and years of doing this, John, you and I both know intimately they do not care about the hypocrisy.
I know.
But you, is the audience, and has to be able to talk to other people and say that this isn't the same as worker solidarity. This isn't the same as some type of movement where, oh look, we're trying to amplify what workers are saying, what truck drivers are saying, what the working class is saying. No, this is an anti-vax protest that is and arguably being astroturfed by a lot of these political groups, but definitely being used as a rhetorical device for Republicans to just antagonize against any progress on COVID-19 at all.
Yeah, you're 100% right. Definitely, I mean, the funding for it has been massively astroturfed. The fact that like international right-wing media gives outsized attention and bizarrely disconnected from reality coverage of it, because at the end of the day, they don't care about Canadian truckers. Kayleigh McEnany and Sean Hannity are never gonna talk to a Canadian trucker again once this is over. It is convenient for their own purposes. This is not about them. And as I've said before, wait until the day comes when the Canadian truckers are protesting for higher wages or better working conditions. We'll see how many primetime interviews they get on Fox News for that. And so
why doesn't Sean Hannity ask those truckers what their health insurance is like?
Yeah, exactly. Well, and by the way, in a little bit when we get to Jeanine Pirro, she's gonna seem to acknowledge that there are other things that their lives could be better on, but she's not going to advocate for those. In any event, you're totally right, and like they're trying to give their audience an insane idea of what these protests are like, what the protesters are like, and also get them ready for, okay, if violence happens, because it looks like there's at least a chance of it, I want you to already be, let's say, vaccinated against the idea that these protesters will be in any way responsible if they begin killing them, people. But we'll see, we'll see. In any event, I want to respond to one of the other lies, which is, you've got the support of the people. Well, again, it is true, there are some people who support them, and 100% of Fox hosts support them, that's true. But what do people actually think? So there's this new poll by Angus Reid that talked to a bunch of Canadians. What do they think that protesters should do? 72% said go home now, they've made their point. 6% aren't sure. 22% said stay in Ottawa and other protest sites until their demands are met, which 22% isn't nothing. Let's acknowledge that. And there's some uncertainty among other people. But 72% say, dude, we get it. Go home. And by the way, they're paying attention. This isn't a thing where there's a lot of ignorance. 2/3 polled said that they've been following it in the news and discussing it with friends and family. 3 in 10 say they're still paying some attention to it. Only about 1% aren't aware of this. So people get what the protest is. So I think that their evaluation of what should happen is actually worth something. This is something they understand. By the way, more than 2 in 5 now say that Canadian protests have made them more inclined to support ongoing restrictions related to masking and vaccination requirements to cross the border. So again, you can do your protest, but we get to evaluate how it's working, and it seems like it's actually driving people against your position. That doesn't mean you don't get to protest, but we should evaluate the context.
Yeah, every single argument for protest, which as a leftist, I love me a good protest. But against Occupy, they were like, what are they doing? Their protest is aimless. When are they gonna go home? And then fast forward to now, and it's they need to stay out there longer, even though their movement is working against them, even though more people are now convinced by masking because of this, even though I'm saying, hey, look, if there's violence, them's the breaks. That's just what happens. Like, at least I think a lot of people do at the end of the day, even if they're divorced from politics, they try to care about some ideological consistency, even if they don't have it themselves. And of course, people don't have memories long enough to know, oh, I know back what Sean Hannity was saying back during Occupy, like we always do here. But like that's our job to be able to say and call that out here. And so I hope deep down that people will start to see through a lot of these inconsistencies, not even call them hypocrisies. It's like, why do you have this one stance here and this other stance here? Clearly, you're just picking favorites. Hopefully, people are able to see how often both sides pick favorites and act accordingly based on that.
Exactly. And by the way, we're not saying that you can't have any hypocrisy or anything that's in the neighborhood of hypocrisy. You can, for instance, support the goals of one protest and not another. That's not hypocrisy, but how about this? How about this as an expectation for consistency? As you pointed out, Ben Shapiro said, I had a different position on a different one. Okay, but how about not being supportive of legislation being passed that allows people to run down and murder protesters? How about that? How about like very specific hypocrisies being voided? Like, how could Trudeau possibly arrest people that have camped out and have declared that they're never leaving? But when the Seattle Autonomous Zone was set up, you wanted it to be cleared out. You wanted Occupy Wall Street to be cleared out. The protesters outside of the White House should be bashed out of there by cops with riot shields and that sort of thing. Like, you can have some hypocrisy. We're humans, we're flawed creatures. We're not all robotic, we're not Mark Zuckerberg. But I'm saying you could at least not try to outlaw the same sorts of protests that you'll spend weeks lauding in another circumstance. That's all I'm asking for, at least.
100% right, John.
For more political news breakdowns, interviews, stories of activism, and me trying my hardest to care about the occasional big celebrity news story, subscribe to our YouTube channel at youtube.com/thedamagereport. And you can ring the bell wherever it is so you don't miss anything.